Hi, it's Patrick Hutzel from IntensiveCareHotline.com, where we instantly improve the lives for families of critically ill patients in intensive care so that you can make informed decisions, have peace of mind, real power, real control, and so that you can influence decision making fast, even if you're not a doctor or a nurse in intensive care. This is another episode of Your Questions Answered, and in last week's episode I answered another question from one of our readers. The question last week was, the ICU doctor can't explain the reason why my sister has congestive heart failure. Help! You can check out last week's question by clicking on the link below this video. In today's episode of Your Questions Answered, I want to answer a question from one of my clients, Vicky, as part of my one-on-one consulting and advocacy service. Vicky's sister is in ICU and Vicky is asking why the ICU doctor is so rude that he keeps on saying that her sister wants nothing but to die. So today's episode is, the ICU doctor is so rude and keeps on telling that my sister in ICU wants only to die. What will I do? You can also check out the previous one-on-one consulting and advocacy session with me and Vicky by clicking on the link below this video in the written version of this blog. And if you're watching this on YouTube, just click on the link below this video where you get directed to our website and where you can watch the video also and have the written version of the blog. So Vicky writes, he said that he had been telling Dr. Ford that this type should not be tapped because it pulls out protein, which exacerbates the problem. Why did Dr. Ford attempt to proceed anyway and without asking me or her family? We are glad my sister said no. Dr. David admitted to me that he was puzzled about why my sister couldn't take more food. He asked where she had been living and if they fed her okay. He said he doesn't like bolus feeds because it is too easy for nurses to sign off that they feed them when they did not. He said she has been malnourished for a long time. He was direct, stating that the reason she was not getting better was because of her malnourishment. He asked how long it had been since her brain injury and Vicky told him almost 8 years. Later, Vicky saw that he put on my sister's record that she had been bedridden for 10 years, which was not true. She had her accident in 2012, but she was walking and living a fairly normal life until her hospitalization and subsequent failed shunt and later psychosis, which resulted in her being wheelchair bound for 1 year and bedridden for 5 months. We think that part of Dr. David's opinion about what should be done was based on the assumption that she had been like this for what he understood to be 10 years. He told Vicky in that meeting that people can live a long time with only partial lung function, pointing to John Wayne as an example. He asked what would need to happen for us to feel okay about her leaving. Vicky told him that hospice would let her be on high flow, so she would at least need to be weaned down on that. We felt a sense of peace about the conversation because Dr. David took the time to talk compassionately and logically about the situation and give actual information to process. No one had done this before. He also was kind to our sister and joked around with her, and they found that they had things in common. He treated her as a human being. Vicky felt that she finally had some actual information to base decisions on, but that didn't mean the final decision was made regarding hospice. We felt puzzled as to why it would be so hard to rectify the situation if malnourishment was the main underlying cause. After talking with Dr. David, Vicky finally felt like she had a handle on the real issue, malnourishment. She had the phone meeting with you, Patrick, an ICU advocate for families with patients in ICU. You asked Vicky what her biggest frustration was, and she told you that it was frustrating that something as simple as low protein could cause such devastating effects and could not be fixed. You mentioned that there may be some other ideas to look into to address the malnourishment and asked Vicky if we had heard about or if they had tried total parenteral nutrition, also known as TPN, and we had not. We felt that bringing up your question with the doctors is important and that they would answer and consider your questions because this is what you do after having many years of experience in critical care and intensive care. Vicky, Joshua, and my sister's caretaker talked about Vicky's discussion with Dr. David, who said there was nothing else to be done and who encouraged hospice, but also considered the talk with you, Patrick, who felt that there was still a few more questions to be asked and how you felt that you would be most helpful to us if you could really know the whole picture. I told the pulmonologist that we were leaning towards going home instead of hospice, but at that point I didn't think there were any other avenues to explore. After talking to you, Patrick, I realized we might have a few more questions that we want addressed before committing to discharge with hospice. We thought for a moment about if we should throw in the towel at that point or if we should try one last time to get these other questions answered, and we decided this is our last chance. We will have a meeting with you, Patrick, and the medical team, and then we will feel certain that we truly did our due diligence and we can sleep at night with peace, that we left no stone unturned. We requested a meeting to meet with the medical team. Is this not common practice to have a meeting with the family before they made life or death decisions? But Dr. Ford couldn't be there as he had an emergency. We sat in a circle in the meeting room down the hall of the ICU with the ICU nurse manager, the case worker, and Mr. Mendes from risk management. Before the meeting, Mr. Mendes came to my sister's room to get permission from my sister for you, Patrick, to speak with us and the medical staff. Via conference call, Patrick introduced himself and got an overview of the history, asking a few pertinent questions, including questions about if they had tried certain treatments which we were not aware of and why or why not. Our main question was why they had not tried TPN to increase my sister's protein levels. The ICU nurse and the nurse manager were the only medical professionals in the room, were very professional and courteous, and tried their best to answer the questions, but were limited in their ability to answer. Then, about 30 minutes into our conference, Dr. Ford stormed into the room. He did not address us or shake our hands. He did not look at us, but stood in the middle of the room and looked at the phone and began to aggressively and loudly interrogated you, Patrick. Vicky and Joshua both took notes that evening just after it happened, so as to ensure our memories didn't fail us when we decided to write this letter. So we quote Dr. Ford here in bold, followed by our response to some of the things that he had said. You have asked Dr. Ford about their current management plan for our sister's current health condition, and then Dr. Ford yelled at the phone, "What are your credentials?" As soon as you have started to speak, Dr. Ford interrupted you, and you continued confidently stating that you are board certified and had 20 years ICU experience, and you are there to help us to get the best care and treatment that our sister deserves. Dr. Ford then asked you where your experience was from, and you, Patrick, an ICU advocate, stated in the UK and Australia and in Germany. Then one by one you have asked the most pertinent questions that made Dr. Ford grew defensive. Number 1, what could have led to our sister's congestive heart failure? Number 2, why have they not opted for total parenteral nutrition if they are telling that malnutrition is one of my sister's health problems? Number 3, what are their next courses of treatment plan for our sister? Dr. Ford then condescendingly said, well, first I will tell you my credentials, and proceeded to list all his educations, awards, etc. He then took over the one-sided conversation, giving his interpretation of what had happened so far. Not one time did he refer to my sister by her name, but only as that woman or your sister. I feel like I'm on trial here. We have told you people over and over again we have done all we can do here. He never once actually looked at us, only the phone. I am here to inject a dose of reality. That woman won't cooperate with anything we do. She won't take her medications, won't do any procedures. She only says she wants to die. We both felt very defensive, helpless and belittled. Joshua attempted to politely defend our family, stating, this is our sister we are talking about. I never have met you and I have never spoken with you. We just want to make sure we have all relevant questions asked and can leave here knowing that we have tried everything and have not left with any unanswered questions. The only time anyone in the family has ever talked with Dr. Ford was on the phone in the wee hours of that morning when he called Vicky. He had never met him in person. No one ever told us that my sister wanted to die or wouldn't take her meds. She never told us this herself. We never observed her resisting meds. Meds were given in her PEG tube, and our family and our sister's caretaker were very actively involved and were around every day for hours a day. My sister did tell us she was tired of doing this, tired of being sick. She even said, I give up at one point, but the thought passed quickly as her traumatic brain injury caused impulsivity in speech and short-term memory loss. At one point when the hospice chaplain A friend of ours came to visit her in the hospital and prayed with her. She asked my sister if she wanted to thank God for anything or ask him for anything, and my sister said, "I thank God I'm not dead." After she was discharged later, she told us she was so glad she was still alive and out of the hospital. Also, oftentimes when they would ask how she was, she would say, "Great, this was not a woman who truly wanted to go home and die." She has the mental capacity to make her own decisions, and I can't force something on her she doesn't want. Vicky explained to Dr. Ford that she had not had the mental capacity to make her own decisions. She wanted to drive a car, for instance. When we told her she could not do that, she said, "Why not?" We told her she could get in an accident and die, and she said, "I don't care if I die." CNAs would need to change her briefs after a BM, and she would resist them, and when we would tell her she could get a bad diaper rash, she would say, "I don't care." Her judgment was like a 3-year-old who wanted what she wanted, no matter if it was good for her or not. She did not have the judgment or awareness of future consequences to make major medical decisions on her own, only with the support of her family discussing it with her. We got a brief word in to Dr. Ford and asked him about TPN. All he could say is it would take 6 months of TPN to her levels where they need to be. We realized that my sister was 65 and brain injured, and that her life had not turned out as she had hoped. But God still worked in her life and was drawing her closer to him, and she had new perspective on life. As Vicky understands it, she thought that Catholic bioethics, through the principles of autonomy, recognizes that the onus of decision making for treatments should be left to the individual or the individual's representative if they are incapacitated. Ever since her traumatic brain injury, my sister did not have the mental capacity to weigh the pros and cons to make major life and death decisions. This was confirmed at least twice. A copy of this report can be made available if requested. For 8 years, my sister trusted Vicky and Joshua as her powers of attorney to make good medical and financial decisions for her, so we considered it a grave responsibility. Patrick advised us that it is only reasonable that a family would receive an explanation as to why a particular treatment, in this case TPN, is not being pursued, so they can decide if they think it is best to try the treatment or not. This is not for the doctor to decide unilaterally. The length of time it would take to recover is not necessarily an adequate reason in and of itself to deny a person that treatment, so we feel Dr. Ford owed us a more thorough and respectful explanation. What would be the problem of 6 months of TPN have been? Where are the risks? We had no idea, and we would have liked to have known, if for no other reason but to simply have peace that everything had been considered. Yet he dismissed us. We never had our question addressed before Dr. Ford declared, "This has gone on long enough, and now I'm going to take my nurse to get out there and do her job taking care of patients." Dr. Ford's entire demeanor and tone were aggressive, angry, and condescending. After he left, the case manager and risk manager moved immediately into business mode as if nothing had happened. Vicky broke down into tears and said, "Before we talk, I need to cry, and I want you to know that I'm not crying because my sister is potentially dying. I'm crying because of the way he talked to us." We felt completely disrespected, disregarded, belittled, and frankly shocked. We were in one of the most tensed emotional situations of our lives, with one of the most difficult decisions we had ever had to make, but which Vicky signed up for as power of attorney and felt called to take seriously, and we received no kindness, no compassion, or even information from her doctor in our one chance to talk with him. After the meeting, we were so deflated that we couldn't think about it anymore. We had been close to a decision about if it was time to take her out and have her on hospice at home, but Dr. Spencer threw us into such a tailspin that Vicky couldn't think logically. We then spent the night doing other things because our minds were in a state of shock over it, instead of going to see my sister again, as we were too emotional to be helpful to my sister in ICU, and Vicky couldn't face anyone there out of embarrassment and hurt. It was apparent that Dr. Ford and Dr. David would not do any more to help my sister, so we needed to decide if she would go home on hospice or go back to the nursing home. We had promised my sister that she could go home if she went on hospice, But since Dr. David told us that she could live an extended period of time, we knew that it would be very expensive to pay for full-time caregiving at home. Plus, hospice couldn't take her on the BiPAP, which she definitely needed, considering just 2 days before she was at 80% of oxygen. Dr. Ford had just taken her off antibiotics. We had been told that nursing homes would not allow feeding pumps, but this was the only way that my sister could receive nutrition slow enough without going into respiratory distress. We had also been told that it was unlikely they would take my sister unless she was on regular O2 cannula. My sister had not been even weaned to high flow yet, much less oxygen cannula, but she had shown signs of being able to wean down, so it seemed that she just needed time. One morning we woke up ready to tackle the problem and make a decision, probably to take our sister home regardless of the money, to fulfill her wishes, but also because rehab hospice would not be able to accommodate her needs of high flow oxygen and the feeding pump. Vicky realized that if we decided that our sister was going to rehab hospice for Medicare purposes, it would be purely a financial decision on Vicky's part, and that felt selfish. Vicky thought she and her husband might just have to bite the bullet and pay out of pocket for multiple shifts of caregivers at home, but if my sister ended up living several months, it would be tough. Vicky's husband was out of state on business, so she texted him to ask if we could have a meeting about finances that day to help make the final decision with his input, but she had not yet heard back from him. Meanwhile, the ICU nurse left a message that rehab hospice would allow a feeding pump. We still didn't know about high flow. Vicky went to hospital and everything had changed literally overnight. Vicky was shocked when she went to the ICU and was informed that our sister had been moved to the floor. She was doing much better and was now on oxygen cannula and holding her oxygen levels. Meanwhile, that same day, our sister's caretaker, and like a daughter to her, bumped into the ICU nurse in the parking lot. ICU nurse chased her down and apologized for how Dr. Ford treated us and told her that she wanted her to know that she didn't feel the way he did and that he didn't represent everyone else in the room. She also said the charge nurse was mortified by the way he acted. When Vicky found my sister's room on the floor, she didn't even have a moment to talk to my sister before the ICU nurse, and Mr. Mendes descended upon her. The ICU nurse must have had the nurse call her the minute she walked in. Vicky was backed into a corner as ICU nurse told her my sister had no more need for hospitalization and the insurance would no longer pay, and asked Vicky to tell her where she would be discharged to that day. Vicky desperately wanted to talk to someone to think through all the confusion about the money, the Medicare, how long she would live, the feeding pump, her wishes, the high flow, which was now oxygen cannula. But they only looked at Vicky with a glazed look and no response, simply waiting for Vicky's answer. Vicky again broke down in tears and told them she felt like a gun was to her head and she was so confused because everything changed overnight, so it was all new information. Vicky sensed that they had made our sister look good so that we would have to leave. Because she looked good, Vicky rethought taking her home because now she wondered if we would be too risky to lose her Medicare because she seemed so miraculously well that Vicky thought she indeed had maybe overcome the illness and would be okay, and then we would really be in trouble financially. The one-on-one consulting session will continue in next week's episode. So, how can you become the best advocate for your critically ill loved one? How can you make informed decisions, get peace of mind, control, power and influence quickly whilst your loved one is critically ill in intensive care? You will get to that all-important feeling of making informed decisions, get peace of mind, control, power and influence when you download your free Instant Impact Report now by entering your email below. In your free Instant Impact Report, you will learn quickly how to make informed decisions, get peace of mind, real power and real control, and how you can influence decision-making fast whilst your loved one is critically ill in intensive care. Your free Instant Impact Report gives you in-depth insight that you must know whilst your loved one is critically ill or is even dying in intensive care. Sign up and download your free Instant Impact Report now by entering your email below. In your free instant impact report, you will learn how to speak the secret intensive care language so that the doctors and the nurses know straight away that you are an insider and that you know and understand what's really happening in intensive care. In your free report, you will also discover how to ask the doctors and the nurses the right questions, discover the many competing interests in intensive care, and how your critically ill loved one's treatment may depend on those competing interests, how to eliminate fear, frustration, stress, struggle, and vulnerability, even if your loved one is dying. You will get 5 mind-blowing tips and strategies helping you to get on the right path to making informed decisions, get peace of mind, control, power, and influence in your situation. You will get real-world examples that you can easily adapt to your and your critically ill loved one's situation. How to stop being intimidated by the intensive care team and how you will be seen as equals. You will get crucial behind-the-scenes insight so that you know and understand what's really happening in intensive care and how you need to manage doctors and nurses in intensive care, and it's not what you think. Thank you for tuning into this week's Your Questions Answered episode, and I'll see you again next week in another update. Make sure you also have a look at our blog section for more tips and strategies, or simply send me an email to support@intensivecarehotline.com with your questions. Also, have a look at our membership site, intensivecaresupport.org, for families of critically ill patients in intensive care. You can also call me, find phone numbers on the top of our website. Also, have a look at our ebook section, and you can also get one-on-one consulting with me via email, Zoom, phone, and Skype by clicking on the relevant tabs on the top of the website. This is Patrick Hutzel from intensivecarehotline.com, and I will talk to you in a few days.